The Social Security office on West 14th Street hummed with fluorescent tension. Children squirmed on molded plastic chairs, their parents scrolling wearily through phones. Conversations overlapped in a dozen languages, punctuated by the soft ding of numbers being called. Near the reception desk, a man stood motionless, looking lost in the noise. He was old, thin, upright despite the heavy limp, his coat too formal for the season. In one hand he held a worn leather binder, in the other, a wooden cane whose tip clicked faintly each time he shifted weight. "Sir, I said you'll have to wait like everyone else," barked the clerk, a young woman behind a fingerprint-smudged window. She didn't look up from her monitor. "We don't skip lines." The old man blinked. I was told to bring this." "Take a seat. You'll be called." Murmurs stirred, nothing loud, but enough to make him nod, bow slightly, and retreat to the back of the line. He moved slowly, cane tapping in a hollow rhythm, as if measuring the distance between each sigh and shuffled foot. No one offered their place. No one looked directly at him. Only the hum and flicker of the overhead lights marked his passage. His name was Elias Monroe. He had once directed entire divisions, crossed war zones with bridges in crates, rebuilt airstrips under mortar fire. Now, he stood in queue behind a teenager filming a TikTok and a woman loudly complaining about her SNAP benefits. In his binder, a lifetime. Original Army records. Hand-drawn combat maps. A notarized letter. He had come not to claim something, but to give, formally donate his personal archive to the National Engineering Corps Museum. A project he'd prepared for months. Yet here, in this crowded office with its frayed carpet and grim efficiency, his story was invisible. Nobody knew. Not yet. Elias adjusted his stance, leaning slightly on the cane. His left knee, long since hardened with old shrapnel and time, ached beneath the strain. Yet he stood without complaint. He had stood in worse places for longer, on rickety bridges under fire, in waist-deep snow without shelter. What was a few hours in a bureaucratic line? When his number, D189, finally blinked on the display, Elias stepped forward, cane tapping on the linoleum, and approached window 4. The clerk behind the glass, a woman in her 20s with a tired expression and platinum-dyed bun, barely glanced up. "Name and purpose of visit," she said. "Elias Monroe. I was instructed to bring original documentation for formal record confirmation," he answered. "It's for a donation to the National Engineering Corps Museum." The woman motioned for the folder without meeting his eyes. "Let me see." He opened the leather binder carefully, setting it down in front of her. It was old but pristine. Inside were original maps, operational diagrams, ration ledgers, troop logistics, letters, even photos, bridges mid-construction, engineering stations hidden beneath jungle canopy, and faces, dozens of soldiers, most now long gone. Tucked at the front was a heavy sheet of paper, notarized, detailing the donation. The clerk flipped through quickly, skimming the documents without comprehension. "This stuff's way too old," she said. "We need digital proof of identity and authorization." "You got that? These are the originals. This is what they asked me to bring." "We don't process paper archives anymore," she said flatly. "Not like this. If you don't have anything digital, we can't help you." He frowned, calm but insistent. "Is there a supervisor I could speak with?" She rolled her eyes. "No. That's the policy." Then, louder, "Next." Elias didn't move at first. For a heartbeat, he simply stood there, dignified, steady, invisible. Behind him, someone muttered about old people clogging the line. Another voice called out, "Let the man through or let him go, damn." Still, Elias said nothing. Slowly, he picked up his binder, nodded to the window, and stepped aside. Across the room, Ray Patel watched. He had brought his daughter, Amita, to update her student records. Normally, he'd have been focused on his phone or her paperwork. But the moment Elias placed the maps on the counter, Ray's attention sharpened. He knew those maps. The hand-drawn coordinates. The military markings. The language of field logistics. He had studied those details in grad school, courses on U.S. military engineering, especially operations from 1950 to 1975. And the name, Eve Monroe, was not unfamiliar. "Stay here," he whispered to his daughter, rising. Outside, beneath the overhang near a dying ficus plant, Ray made a call. The line clicked once, then a brisk voice answered, Dr. Dana Lowering. "Dana, it's Ray Patel." "Ray. It's been a while. Sorry to jump in like this. Quick thing, I'm at the Social Security office on 14th. There's a man here with a binder full of original Army engineering docs. Maps, field journals. Legit stuff. Says he's donating them to the museum." Dr. Lowering was quiet for a beat. "Name?" "Elias Monroe." Another pause, heavier now. "You're absolutely certain?" "He's right in front of me. I'm on my way. Don't let him leave." Ray ended the call and stepped back inside. Elias had returned to a bench near the exit. No one looked at him. He sat with his binder resting on his lap, hands folded over it. Ray approached. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Ray Patel. I couldn't help overhearing. Were you involved in Operation Winter Line?" Elias looked up. "I was." Ray extended a hand. "I studied that operation during my engineering graduate work. Your field strategies are still taught." Elias blinked, as if surprised anyone remembered. "That's kind of you," he said simply. "If you don't mind, I contacted someone at the museum. Dr. Dana Lowering. She's on her way." Elias tilted his head. "You called her?" "I did. She said not to let you leave." A small smile crept into Elias's expression, brief and thin. They waited together. For nearly an hour, the office churned on. Numbers flashed. Clerks called out in monotone. Children cried. But in the corner where the two men sat, there was a quiet stillness. Then the glass doors opened, and a tall woman in a tailored navy coat entered. At her side was a clean-cut man wearing a Department of Defense Archives badge. The woman scanned the room, found Elias instantly, and crossed to him without hesitation. She removed her cap. "Mr. Elias Monroe?" "Yes," he said, slowly rising. "I'm Dr. Dana Lowering, curator at the National Engineering Corps Museum." Her voice dropped in pitch and tone, becoming softer. "Are you the same Elias Monroe who directed battalion operations under Operation Winter Line and Firebase Knox?" He nodded once. She paused. Then, clearly and with reverence, "Sir, the nation remembers." The hum of the room faded. People turned. The receptionist stopped typing. Conversations dropped off. A strange silence filled the space. Dr. Lowering turned slightly to address the bystanders. This man led operations that saved countless American lives. He pioneered field logistics that are still studied today. His maps and records are not just paper, they are national heritage. Ray stepped back, allowing the moment to breathe. Elias stood still, quiet as always, but now the room saw him. Not just a man with a cane and binder, but a part of something larger, lasting. Something that had shaped the very roads and bridges the city now used. In that pause, the room remembered something it didn't know it had forgotten. Respect. Dr. Lowering gestured to the man beside her. "This is Lieutenant Samuel Greaves from the Department of Defense Archives. He's here to assist with formal documentation and secure transport of your materials." Elias held his binder close. "I only intended to verify the donation, not cause a scene." You didn't cause a scene, Loring said gently. But we've been waiting years to track these down. Once your name came up, the archives asked us to act quickly. The clerk from earlier hovered behind her counter, still watching. A few visitors glanced over shoulders, uncertain if they were witnessing something official or extraordinary. Ray Patel stepped forward. "Excuse me, could we get a quiet room for a few minutes?" The clerk nodded, avoiding Elias's eyes. She pulled out a plastic badge. "Conference room B. Second left." Elias didn't protest. He walked slowly down the hall with Ray and Lieutenant Greaves. Dr. Loring followed, her coat buttoned tight, boots clicking softly. In the room, sterile and fluorescent, Elias took a seat and laid the binder on the table with care. Greaves and Loring put on gloves and began to examine the documents, handling each one with visible reverence. The binder was more than a collection. It was a roadmap to the past, maps hand-annotated with troop movements, schematics for temporary bridges, accounts of resource drops and casualty routes. Each item bore the clean handwriting of someone who'd been there and survived. Ray watched in silence, remembering textbooks from his university years. Those pages were faded and clinical. These were lived. "You catalogued everything?" he finally asked. "Every shift," Elias replied. "Weather changes. Water levels. Bridge weight tolerance after rain. Our roads saved lives, or cost them if we miscalculated." Greaves nodded. "It's meticulous. We don't see many field journals this complete, especially not from Korea and early Vietnam." Dr. Loring turned a page. "This one shows a floating causeway at Da Nang. 1966. Yes. Built in 3 nights. We lost 2 men to mortar fire, but we finished on time. It held over 1,000 tons before it was retired." Elias reached into his coat and unwrapped a small object, a brass compass, slightly dulled but intact. "This came with me through it all. Winter line to Firebase Knox." Dr. Loring leaned in. "Is this the original?" He nodded. "Gift from another engineer. Korean Corps. Died in '52. Ray could see the engraving, "Hold fast." Beneath it, the initials EM. "I cleaned it every Sunday," Elias said, placing it gently on the table. "Polishing it reminded me to stay true." "We'd like to feature it in the exhibit," Loring said. "Centerpiece." "It's just a compass," Elias murmured. "But it's yours," she replied. Greaves logged the materials into a secure database, each document photographed and sealed. Elias signed the transfer forms with a slow, steady hand. He never rushed. There was a discipline in the way he moved, even now. As they finished, Dr. Loring offered him a document packet. "We'll digitize everything and return a full set to you. You'll also have access to all curated materials." "Thank you," Elias said simply. They returned to the lobby. This time, Elias didn't blend into the backdrop. Visitors looked up. Some stood. A man with a veteran's patch on his jacket gave a small salute. The room was different now, quieter, watchful. The clerk at window 4 stepped out from behind the desk. Her voice was softer. "Mr. Monroe, I apologize for how I spoke earlier." Elias met her gaze. "It's easy not to see people." She flushed. "Still. It won't happen again." He nodded once and moved toward the door, Ray by his side. "Do you need a ride, sir?" Ray asked. "I like to walk," Elias replied. "Helps me remember where I am." They stepped into the open air. Clouds hovered low, but no rain came. Cars passed. Pedestrians bustled by. Yet it felt, if only for a moment, like the world had slowed to acknowledge something. As they reached the curb, Ray hesitated. "Mr. Monroe, would you consider speaking at a college seminar?" I teach engineering. Just a classroom talk. Elias considered it. Maybe. If they listen. They will, Ray said. Especially if they understand what you carried. I carried maps and metal, Elias said. They carried me. Ray smiled. That's what I mean. Elias paused at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. His cane tapped once, a sharp punctuation against the concrete. You think they still teach patience? He asked. Ray shook his head. No. But they could learn it. The light blinked green. They crossed together, one step at a time, strangers moving around them unaware. Behind them, the office door shut with a quiet click, unnoticed by all except the woman still standing at window 4, hands folded, eyes fixed on the street. Inside her desk drawer sat a sticky note with 2 words, Elias Monroe. She didn't want to forget the name again. The ceremony was held on a crisp Tuesday morning at the National Engineering Corps Museum. No television crews, no banners. Just a row of folding chairs under the atrium skylight and a glass case waiting to be filled. The museum director, Dr. Dana Lowering, stood at the podium with a binder tucked beneath her arm. The air held a solemn kind of respect, nothing forced or decorative, only clean lines, polished concrete, and quiet. Elias Monroe arrived wearing his tan wool coat and carrying the same cane from that long wait at the Social Security office. A museum staff member guided him in. At his side, Ray Patel walked silently, adjusting his tie, trying not to look too nervous. He had brought his daughter, Amita, who held a notebook with tabs sticking from its pages. She didn't speak but watched everything. Lieutenant Greaves from the Department of Defense Archives stood off to the side, gloved hands holding a small black case. Inside was the brass compass, polished and centered on a navy blue cushion. It had been cleaned but not restored. The wear told its own story. Dr. Lowering took the microphone. Today we honor a man not for what he carried in war, but for what he chose to preserve in peace. Master Sergeant Elias Monroe served through 2 wars, across frozen hills, jungles, and open fire zones, laying down infrastructure where none existed. Roads. Bridges. Convoy paths. Supply routes. The veins and arteries of motion. Without such work, victories remain stuck. His donation today, maps, journals, photographs, is a gift not only to history but to the future of engineering itself. She turned to Elias. Sir, thank you. Elias stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was firm and measured. I didn't save these for honor. I saved them because too many people didn't come back. They deserve to be remembered in more than numbers. We built things to keep them moving. We marked things so others wouldn't fall. I just happened to write it all down. He paused. I used to think no one would care. That it would all get boxed and forgotten. But you're here. So, thank you. He sat. No applause yet, just silence. Then Dr. Lowering stepped aside, and the compass was unveiled. People leaned forward as if in church. The exhibit, titled Lines That Held, was arranged in a semicircle, his hand-drawn schematics, yellow journal entries, photos of military bridges under construction, soldiers hauling lumber through water. One section showed aerial maps with Elias's pencil notations, angles, load limits, drainage patterns. At the center, the compass. Ray leaned over to Amita. See that? That's a floating causeway sketch. From Vietnam? Korea. Imjin River. That one saved an entire unit from being cut off. She jotted notes furiously. Afterward, guests wandered through the gallery, murmuring. Greaves logged final archival notes on a tablet. Elias watched quietly, hands behind his back. At one point, he leaned toward a photo of a river crossing and whispered a name no one caught. Later, in the museum cafe, Dr. Loring sat with Elias and Ray. "You never considered publishing these journals?" she asked. "They weren't stories," Elias replied. "They were instructions. To be used. They read like stories now. I suppose time does that." Ray sipped coffee. "You ever think about teaching? Just one class. Something about field logistics. I don't talk well in front of groups." "You did today." Elias didn't answer but gave a quiet shrug. The next day, the museum received over 200 messages, from veterans, engineers, even students. Some asked for copies of Elias's diagrams. Others simply said, "Thank you." A few came from overseas. One was from a man in Seoul who remembered his grandfather mentioning a Sergeant Monroe during the war. He included a photo, two young men, knee-deep in mud, smiling. The museum printed it and added it to the exhibit. Meanwhile, back at the Social Security office, Ray Patel began volunteering twice a month. He helped veterans navigate forms, especially those dealing with outdated records. Over time, he created a simple system to cross-check service timelines and identify historically significant documentation. Staff began using it. Slowly, the culture shifted. A laminated sign appeared above the front counter, "Veterans served here with honor." The same clerk from Elias's first visit now kept a reference guide by her station. She didn't talk about what had changed, but she listened more, paused longer, and said, "Thank you for your service," like she meant it. One morning, she placed a fresh cup of coffee on her desk before opening. No name, just the warm cup, ready. The museum exhibit became a quiet success. High school field trips. Retired engineers. Graduate students tracing historical logistics. One university requested a digital archive. A second donated funds for expansion. Dr. Loring sent Elias a letter, "They're studying you now. Just as you studied the terrain." One evening, Elias returned with Ray and Amita. The museum had just installed a touchscreen map. Students could tap on areas of Korea or Vietnam and see journal entries tied to those coordinates. Some included audio clips, read aloud by volunteers. In one, Elias described estimating load tolerance on a temporary span under artillery threat. In another, he spoke of recalculating bridge angles at night after floodwater rose 6 inches. "Do you remember all of it?" Amita asked. "Not the numbers," Elias said. "But the cold? That, I remember." They walked slowly through the exhibit. At the end, Amita pointed to the phrase etched above the compass display, "Hold fast." "Did you come up with that?" "No," Elias replied. "It was his. The man who gave me that compass." "You never forgot?" "No. And now neither will anyone else." Elias sat by the window now. Most days began there, cane across his lap, fingers lightly resting on its worn grip. The museum exhibit had been open for nearly 3 months. Each week, he received letters, some handwritten, others typed with care, from people thanking him. Engineers, veterans, teachers. A high school in Nebraska sent a stack of postcards signed by every student in a civil engineering elective. Each one had a sketch of a bridge or compass on the back. He read them slowly, one by one. Dr. Loring came by often. She'd bring updates on the exhibit, visitor counts, additions, questions from researchers. They were planning a symposium on military engineering, and she'd invited Elias to be the keynote guest. "I don't speak," he reminded her. "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to be seen." Ray Patel had taken on a larger role at the Social Security office. His volunteer efforts turned into a formal advisory position. With the museum's help, he developed a pilot program to help identify at-risk veteran records, cases where service history was either incomplete or misclassified due to old documentation systems. The office now had a part-time liaison trained in historical verification. It was the first of its kind in the state. Ray visited Elias every other week. They'd talk about the museum, the office, sometimes just weather. One visit, Ray brought a heavy canvas bag filled with printed engineering thesis proposals. "Every one of these references your journals," he said. "You're a source now." Elias chuckled softly. Took long enough. But he kept them, marked a few with sticky tabs, underlined parts with a faded pencil. His compass stayed near, always within arm's reach. Then came the request. A military base out west, Fort Victor, was planning a temporary exhibit for Veterans Day. They wanted to borrow the compass. The idea unsettled Elias more than he let on. The compass had never left his side in 70 years, through war, through peace, through the long march of obscurity that followed. "It won't be gone long," Dr. Loring said gently. "They'll fly it by hand, 2 staff members. Full security." Elias hesitated. "It's not about safety." "Then what is it?" He looked out the window. "I kept it close because it kept others alive. Letting it go feels like ending something. It's not an end. It's an echo." Eventually, he agreed. When the day came, the transfer was quiet and precise. A museum team arrived with a temperature-controlled case. Greaves, now a close friend of the archives, supervised the packaging personally. Before sealing the lid, Elias placed one finger against the compass's brass lid and whispered something no one caught. They left him a replica, identical in size, but lighter, hollow. Just for comfort. Days passed. Elias resumed his quiet routine, though his hand drifted often to where the real compass used to sit. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. It came from Sergeant Tessa Lynn, active duty at Fort Victor. Inside was a photograph. The compass rested in a glass cube beneath a large image of Monroe himself, standing beside a temporary bridge. Around it stood uniformed men and women, heads bowed. On the back of the photo, "They salute you." He stared at it for a long time. That weekend, Ray arrived with news. "They've asked you to visit the base," he said. Elias raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "A dedication. They're naming a training structure after you, Monroe Span. It's going to be used for combat engineering simulation drills." Elias said nothing. "They want you to walk across the bridge." He chuckled. "Still testing my load capacity, huh?" But the idea lingered. After a few days, Elias agreed to go. The museum helped arrange transport. 2 staff members accompanied him, Greaves among them. Dr. Loring remained behind, managing the main exhibit. She gave him a small envelope before he left. "Open it after you cross," she said. Fort Victor was a dusty grid of concrete and motion. Elias was given a room near the parade grounds. The morning of the ceremony, he was fitted with a lightweight dress uniform replica, matching what he'd worn during Korea. The cloth felt stiff against his shoulders, but right. Ray joined him at the staging area. "It's just a bridge," he said. "Just," Elias echoed. The Monroe Span stretched across a dry ravine on the outskirts of the base. Built to simulate real-world conditions, it used temporary supports and modular platforms like the old Bailey units Elias once knew. Soldiers stood in uniform along the edges. Journalists stayed behind a rope line. No stage, no microphones. Just the bridge and the man. With effort, Elias walked forward. The cane tapped once, twice, then steady. The wind blew lightly across the open span. Dust rose around his shoes. Halfway across, he stopped. Behind him, a soldier snapped to attention. Elias lifted his head and walked the final steps without pause. When he reached the end, Ray helped him down the last incline. A junior officer handed him the compass. The real one. "Welcome back, sir." Elias took it, turned it over, and nodded. Still true north. Ray handed him Dr. Loring's envelope. Inside was a single photograph, the exhibit's opening day, Elias standing beside the compass, surrounded by students. On the back, the lines still hold. Because you did. He didn't say anything. But he didn't let go of the compass. Later, back at the base guest quarters, Elias sat in a chair facing the window. Night had fallen. The bridge lay behind them, lit now by floodlights and watched by trainees preparing for the next day's drills. Elias rested the compass on the table. Ray asked, "Would you do it all again?" Elias thought for a moment. "I'd do it with better boots." Ray laughed, but Elias didn't smile. Instead, he looked out at the soldiers, then down at the compass. "The difference now," Elias said softly, "is that someone's watching. Someone remembers." He picked up the compass and clicked it shut. And for the first time in decades, he slept without it. Winter crept in slowly that year. The museum lights dimmed earlier in the afternoon, casting long shadows across the lines that held exhibit. Still, visitors came, school groups bundled in scarves, older couples tracing glass with gloved fingers. The compass, now back in its case, remained the focal point. No smudges touched its surface. A child once asked why it wasn't pointing north. Her teacher told her it had already done its job. Elias Munro continued his quiet routines. Mornings by the window. Walks when he could manage them. Fewer now. The stiffness in his legs was getting worse. Some days, the cane felt heavier than memory. But he never let it go. He received a letter from Fort Victor. They'd completed their first full round of training exercises using the Munro span. Enclosed was a photo, young engineers standing proudly in front of the bridge, some resting elbows on the rails, a few holding up their notebooks. On the back, "We carry forward." Dr. Loring began preparing a formal archive release of Elias's full materials, every map, every page of journal entries, photos, letters, calculations. She hired a graduate team to digitize it all. The process was slow, but Elias didn't mind. He visited the team once, sat quietly while they worked. At one point, a student leaned over to ask, "Did you really build a bridge from just wood and cable under artillery fire?" "No," Elias replied. "We built two. The first one didn't last." They all looked up. He didn't elaborate. One afternoon, Elias received a call from a man with a weathered voice and a New Orleans drawl. "Munro? Elias Munro? Who's asking?" "George Thibodeau. You knew my brother. Private James Thibodeau. Imjin River. 51. Elias went quiet. "He mentioned you. Said you pulled him out when the crossing got hit." "I remember. I found your name in a footnote, an article about combat infrastructure. Been trying to reach you since." They talked for hours. George sent over photos, including one of a field med kit with Elias's initials etched on the underside in pencil. That night, Elias didn't sleep much. He sat by the window, holding the compass, watching snow gather on the sill. News came that the Department of Veterans Affairs had reviewed Elias's documents and, based on corroborated service records, posthumously approved additional honors for 3 members of his unit. Families would be notified. The recognition wouldn't change history, but it would finally touch those still living within it. Ray Patel began compiling materials for a children's book about engineering in wartime. He titled it The Bridges Between Us, inspired by Elias's journals. Amita helped with illustrations, her drawings clean and wide-eyed, full of bridges that arched into clouds. Elias reviewed the drafts. "Too hopeful," he said once. But he didn't ask her to change them. Winter deepened. Elias's walk stopped altogether. One morning, the museum called. A student visiting from overseas had recognized a photo in the exhibit, a man standing beside Elias on a wooden beam over a flooded ravine. The student's grandfather had spoken of the same event. He'd died 3 years earlier. The family asked for a transcript of Elias's journal entry from that day. Dr. Loring printed it and mailed a copy with Elias's handwritten note included. He was brave. Braver than I was. We followed him, not the other way around. Elias's health declined in slow, steady measure. When he could no longer make it to the museum, they brought it to him in pieces, digitized scans on a tablet, letters read aloud, new display photos in print. On a quiet February afternoon, Ray arrived with Amita. She brought a final proof of her book. Elias turned each page slowly. On the last one, a drawing showed an old man beside a young girl, both pointing at a bridge in the distance. The caption read, "Built to last." "That one okay?" she asked. He nodded. A week later, Elias was admitted to the hospital. Pneumonia. Ray stayed by his side, reading from journal excerpts and letters. "You've become a reference," he said. "An index entry." Elias gave a faint smile. Long way from line cues. On his last night, Greaves and Dr. Loring came. They brought a framed version of the museum plaque bearing his name. At the bottom, "For the roads laid, the paths cleared, the lives connected." Elias reached for the compass one last time. "Put it back," he whispered. "Back where?" Loring asked gently. "In the case. The real one." They nodded. His final words came later, after a long silence. "Just two, still holding." Elias Monroe passed in the early morning hours. No alarms. No headlines. Just a quiet room, one man, and a cane resting against the wall. In the days that followed, the museum received a flood of letters, digital tributes, engineering forum threads. A scholarship fund was created in Elias's name for military engineers returning to school. The lines that held exhibit received permanent status. At Fort Victor, trainees gathered in silence before crossing Monroe Span. Each rotation began with a reading from one of his field entries. At the Social Security office, the plaque was rehung with a new line beneath the old. "We remember." Ray gave a eulogy at the private ceremony. No fanfare, just stories, of muddy crossings, metal fatigue, and a compass that never failed. Dr. Loring closed the event with a quote from Elias's journal. "A bridge isn't just structure, it's promise. A way forward, even if you never get to cross it yourself." As guests left, Amita remained behind, staring at the compass in its case. She held a notebook to her chest. "Will they forget?" she asked Ray quietly. "Not if we keep building." She nodded and stepped forward, pressing her hand gently against the glass. Just for a moment. Then she turned and walked away, the reflection of the compass still lingering behind her in the case. Still holding.